central, wonderful memory. Central. Frankly, defining
So fun.
of our honeymoon was that we were reading The Lord of the Rings out loud together.
Yeah, which is a kind of a funny choice for your honeymoon, but we weren't choosing it for our honeymoon. It was just something that John had never read.
I love when there was something that you had from before we were married that you really loved that now
that we were
you
sharing.
were sharing
Yeah.
with another central good memory of our marriage. Central was reading
Barchester Towers.
Barchester Towers.
Yeah, it was super fun.
An incredibly fun, interesting book. We literally read it out loud together very early on in our marriage.
Oh,
Other ones,
Sir Walter Scott, Old Mortality.
my
Yeah, that was great too.
my goodness, that's why I'm so glad I married you. That was so fun.
Yeah.
That was unbelievable. Hi, I'm John Cuddeback.
And I'm Sofia Cuddeback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
and raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship,
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live.
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then The Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us. Welcome, everybody. Always great to be with my wife, Sofia. Today's topic is reading. And so we're calling this Reading Together for Relationship. One of the titles we had considered for our discussion was, Are we reading together enough? We thought maybe that was a little too, aggressive or too challenging.
Yeah. It is the summer after all. We're kind of in summer mode. We don't want to have too much foisted upon us.
And part of the reality there is for as far as I'm concerned, for you and me, the answer is definitely no. We're not reading together enough. And that's why I thought of having that as the question, because what we want to do here in this discussion is share a little bit of our experience of reading together in marriage and take that as a kind of primary instance of reading together for relationship. But I think the principle applies to reading together in friendships, relationships of various kinds. But I say the richer the relationship is, the more important, even central, is reading together. And part of our own story is going to be how it's often in some ways a bridge too far. We wish we were reading together more than we are. And I'll share a little bit more about that. But we're going to share a little bit our own experience as we talk about this. I'm interested to see what your sense is, dear, when I share here what my feeling about what it's been like reading together and the kind of ebb and flow of that throughout our marriage. And then we're going to make some suggestions, because I do think this is one of those things where, once again, from wherever we are, baby steps, this is worth our talking about, everybody thinking about. How can we do better in reading together? Because I will just start by asserting this, dear, that given human nature, and in any case, our place in history. If you go back to certain cultures that were more oral, and bards, okay, they weren't reading together. They were doing something else that stands in for that. But in our culture, which is a very reading culture, post-printing press, I think that what we're reading at any given time in our life is a very important issue. And then likewise, what we are doing to be sharing what we're reading with the most important people in our life is a key factor, even perhaps in some sense the litmus test of how those relationships are doing. What do you think?
Well, the first thing that struck me is when you said, we're definitely not reading enough together. My interior feeling was, one, yes, that's true. We're not. Two, how could we possibly fit that in? And then it just struck me how sometimes that's a little bit the challenge of maintaining, pursuing, and continuing a relationship with your spouse in the midst of a lot of busyness. Aren't there a lot of things about relationship building that we kind of go, yeah, we should really do that? We don't, whether it's a regular date night or praying together or whatever. It seems like we sometimes just go, wow, that's a bridge too far. And if we really stop and think about it, if it's about building our relationship, can we really afford to say it's a bridge too far? So it just kind of struck me when you said that, like, I just had this feeling of, oh boy, yeah, I wish we could read more, but I know that's kind of a luxury. How often we say that kind of thing about relationship building because the pragmatic things in our life seem to take kind of precedence over that, and we let it go. So I think this is a great conversation, because I do agree with you. There is something exceptional. There are a lot of things that are bridge too far when you're married and raising kids, and not all of them are ones that you should really be necessarily trying to cross. But we do have to determine which are the ones it would be helpful for us. it would be important for us to try to make sure we have time for those. And I think reading is one of them. And I'm really excited to talk about why would reading be different from other things. I do think it is.
Well, I already am finding myself very much agreeing with you and getting excited to talk about it too. And I realize we are going to end this discussion here with some concrete resolutions ourselves.
Mm,
And, even if resolutions aren't perfectly kept, I am a big proponent of life is an ongoing process of setting resolutions and doing your
yeah.
best and then recalibrating and making more
Right.
resolutions and keeping on going. And we can move the needle a little bit, or in any case, we know what we want. We know what we're looking for opportunities to grow in. And you know what? I'm even going to put it this way because this is part of going autobiographical here. This is not one of the better moments in our marriage. Period. No, well, maybe not. But this is not one of the better moments. Oops, no.
Okay, let's see where this is going to go.
No, this
Wow.
is not one of the better moments in our marriage as regards reading out loud together. Now, that might be a sign of other things, but I still will say, even now, the memory of it and the hope for more brings me great joy. Makes me think of it, St. Thomas Aquinas' point. Joy is always in some good possessed. So generally, joy is in some good that you possess right now. But he also points out you can have joy in the memory now of goods possessed in the
Hmm.
past. And he even says, which is really cool, you can have a certain joy now in the hope of goods to be possessed in the future. So, if nothing else, we might bring a little more joy to our marriage or to someone else's or some other relationship by giving a hope that here's something we can strive for.
Hmm.
And in God's good timing, we might be able to do this more. But frankly, what our hopes and desires are very defining of who we are. So it's very much a pointer of where we're
Hmm.
going.
And what
So
we want.
we have to have a certain courage here at times to have a discussion about something. Well, I think sometimes we fail, we get faint of heart and almost don't want to set our sights on it because it'll be too hard for us when we can't achieve it. And I want to say we all have to buck up. We have to have trust. We have to grow in courage here and hope and have a sense of we're going to strive for it. And in God's good timing, this kind of thing will maybe come to a fuller fruition than it can right now. Parents of young children right now might be thinking, the reading out loud together as spouses is just something that's not particularly going to happen. Well, what we're going to mean right here by reading together is not necessarily reading together at the same time. Everybody needs to be reading something, period. There's no such thing. If I remember one time Father John Harden said, if you're too busy to pray, clearly you are too busy. Well, nice line that can be used for a lot of things. If you're too busy to read, you are too busy, and you've got to do something about that.
Hmm.
Now, it might be that it's minimal, but I mean, dads, husbands, if your wife is too busy with the children to read, then you got to change something.
Hmm. Okay, well, I think that statement is a very strong statement, and it kind of asks us or invites us to ask the question, why is reading that important? So it sounds
Right.
like you're saying reading is important in itself. It's important for us as individuals to be reading, and that somehow reading is going to provide a kind of connection that actually builds a bridge, encourages, strengthens the relationship between us. So I think there's something about the nature of reading that is particularly conducive to building that kind of relationship. But I think maybe before we talk about that, let's just talk about what is it about reading something,
Yep.
and how should we what kind of a diet should we be pursuing in reading? Because obviously it's not just
Reading.
it's not just our eyes tracking
No,
over a language,
very
right? So
hard.
yeah, exactly. So anyway,
Yeah.
let's talk
Okay.
about that.
Great. All right. Let's go philosophical. We're rational. The human good is to live according to reason. Secundum rationem esse. To be according to reason. It is a great line from Aristotle. St. Aquinas loves to quote. All right. We're not going to go too deeply into that, other than just to recognize our interior life is kind of the beating heart of our human life. And
Hmm.
thereby interior life, I'm using in a broad sense of kind of the interior conversation, our rational life of awareness, self-reflection, gazing upon reality, considering principles, thinking about higher things, thinking about how to improve life. So kind of seeking practical wisdom, speaking just wisdom, what's called speculative theoretical wisdom of trying to understand God and the higher things better. Ultimately, this is always central to who we are and varies how we do that depending of our precise state in life. This is where I noted earlier, saying, is there such thing as being in an oral culture where you have a rational life, where reading is not necessarily involved. But for us, that's not the case. And so I think it's just simply to say that central to where our thoughts are and to forming our thoughts, developing our thoughts, to cultivating our thoughts is reading, which part of that is because reading is what connects us through kind of hearing. We hear in our reading the thoughts of others,
Mhm.
and we are profoundly social creatures, and we need to have our rational life, our human life, fundamentally directed through hearing from others. Now, it begins as
Mhm.
children before you can read simply from your parents, and obviously oral conversations apart from reading will always remain very important. But I'm going to quickly note two fundamental kinds of reading, and one of them I'm going to divide into two. I'll say kind of the realm of kind of spiritual, and I mean that's spiritual in the sense of kind of focusing on God and our relationship with Him. And then just kind of I'm going to lump everything else together.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's the literary and the historical and the
Mhm.
lighter, but right now I'm going to put those all together.
Mhm.
The way I see it in my life is there's spiritual and there's not spiritual.
Mhm.
I take as absolutely essential. I need to be doing spiritual reading absolutely every day. The first, and here's the division, first and most fundamental, utterly unique kind is reading scripture, because that's reading scripture is listening to God.
Mhm.
St. Thomas Aquinas says that directly. So we have to read scripture to listen to, hear, grow in our relationship with God. Right? So that's the most fundamental reading that has to have a place in
Mhm.
everybody's day. Related to that is other spiritual reading, which is not as essential, but I think is still essential in some form or fashion. Turning to spiritual masters, having our thoughts about our faith, about the cosmos, about fundamental truths. This could be theologians, this could be philosophers, to kind of develop our worldview and thinking about how to live a good life.
Mhm.
So I'm still going to kind of have that be in the spiritual realm, and then there's the realm of kind of literature, history, which
Mhm.
I don't want to. It could be sound too banal just to say kind of personal enrichment. I think it's much more than personal
Yeah,
enrichment.
because it seems to me like what you were saying when you were talking about how man is designed as, living to be a rational animal, have this interior life. We're designed to have this interior life. The interior life you're talking about is not just kind of the capacity to abstract and think abstractly. You're actually talking about man recognizing himself in relation to a greater end, a spiritual end. And so I think that when you talk about I think the second category of literature, reading that you're talking about, I think is important actually, because it's a to say spiritual and then everything else. There's a ton in the everything
Yeah, and I
else.
mean,
And so I think that the kind of, you're saying, talking about man as rational animal and developing this kind of awareness of oneself that way. What does that mean for us in our relationship to other people and to the world and ultimately to God? Those are all very deep questions that certain kinds of reading are going to ask that question and answer that question, or in any case, foster a conversation. There's other kind of reading that doesn't really do that. So for example, I love to read self-help books, in particular things about new developments in physiological kind of help and things like that, different kinds of therapies, different ways of the interaction between the psyche and the physical. Those are kind of, I would put them more in the category of techne, like learning
too.
how things work, which
Yeah,
which has a value in itself. It's
absolutely.
very important. And there is a sense in which you read that stuff, especially for me. I'm like, wow, God is so amazing how he's made creation, right? So this is not to say that that kind of reading doesn't have value,
Sure,
but I think
absolutely.
we're talking about books that are more specifically in the category of what is the ultimate end of man? What are we made for? So this is not
Kind
specifically,
of
so
deeper
spiritual
question.
reading is obviously specifically focused on that end. But then there's a whole breadth of different kind of reading that is asking that question in broader contexts and always asking us to reflect on. And hopefully, if it's good reading,
Right.
it's going to bring us ultimately back to the things that we're experiencing in our spiritual reading, right?
Yeah, right, right,
And
right.
so I think that specifically is certainly in our experience when I'm reading something kind of in the science rank level, that area, and I share it with you, you're like, wow, that's really neat. But it doesn't necessarily provide a springboard for a deeper connection. It is a connection. And
Connection and
while we're sharing something that's interesting, we're both appreciating going, wow, that's really neat. But when we're reading something like Jane Austen, or even if you're reading a really great historical biography
mhm,
of a
mhm,
noble
mhm.
person, or even a historical biography of a particular era. The questions that it's bringing up are ones that kind of lead to the possibility of a much more deeper conversation, or
I
much
completely
deeper
agree with that.
conversation.
And so, right, in our reflecting then on reading together for relationship, and if we're gonna make some resolutions, I think it's gonna be particularly kind of focused more towards the upper end.
Hmm.
This is never to ignore the other
Hmm.
as
Yeah.
though it has
No
no
place.
place whatsoever. By
Yeah.
the way, I think it's also, again, there's so much philosophy of kind of different kinds of writings, and at this point, I think would be a sidetrack for us to try to sort that all
No,
out.
no, it's
But
not necessary.
I do wanna just note, there's another aspect of just reading, for instance, especially great literature. It's a work of art, and it's
Hmm.
beautiful.
Hmm.
And so there's a kind of just even contemplative aspect of to see the beauty of what has been crafted by a great author is very enriching. That's part
Hmm.
of kind of feeding the mind. Joseph Pieper, we're made to see, and really especially to see that which is beautiful.
Hmm.
It is obviously especially enriching. And so there too, we can just say, you love to point out the principle that DJ von Hildebrand said, the higher the thing that you look out at together, the more it unites you. I always
Hmm.
love to remember this. This is an important principle to remember here. The deeper the things that we are thinking about in our rational human life, the more we are able to be united with other people in sharing those deeper things.
Hmm.
This goes back to a very basic principle of friendship, and why the truest, richest friendship is only kind of possible for those who are living a richer, virtuous life. Not just virtuous in the sense of moral virtue, but even intellectual virtue.
Hmm.
The richer our life, which in certain ways you can say in the broad sense, the more virtuous, the more full it
Mm.
is, the more we have to
Right.
share with one another. And virtue, of course, is just living rationally well, to refer back to a great
Hmm.
line from Aristotle. So here we're kind of narrowing in on one great feature, the feature of I don't want to just say our intellectual life. I want to say our human of our life. Of what are we reading will always be very, very, very important. And thus we could just talk about how that cultivates who we are. I might say, as a husband, I need to make sure that you're getting time to read, not so you have something to share with me. So now we have something to talk about
Right.
together, but so that you are growing,
Right.
that you are being yourself, that you are growing to that person God designed you to be. And here, for some people, it will be they already are kind of there. Their desires are, I really love to read.
Right.
So other people who haven't had maybe even a certain kind of education or a
Hmm.
certain kind of personal experience aren't as drawn to it.
Hmm.
Hey, there's always going to be different flowers in
Hmm.
God's bouquet here. And not that everyone has to be hyper intellectual, but here I am going to kind of give a shout that I think there it's worth. Don't be afraid if finding, well, I'm not really, I don't know what to read. I'm not really attracted to
Hmm.
reading. I'm going to say, okay, be at peace. But I think you should work on that. I think
Yeah.
you
And there are a
should
lot
be
of
willing to
resources.
try to
Yeah.
grow me by growing our interior life, by
Hmm.
growing our life of reflection and awareness and presence to the
Yeah.
richer things of life.
Yeah. And there are a lot of resources online now, different groups for reading that have reading lists and all kinds of. So if you are not an avid reader and don't have a kind of broad sense of what kind of things are available to you, then, just reach out for help. There are a lot of really good organizations that are promoting reading that have lots of great reading lists and study questions and things like that. I'll just mention I'm not very well versed or knowledgeable in Charlotte Mason directly, but I have friends who are very well versed in her writings. And she recommends that you always have 3 books on your nightstand in 3 different categories that you're reading at the same time: a spiritual book, a work of literature, and something more technical. And I just thought that was an interesting concept, and it's not making a comment necessarily on what those books are, but it's kind of saying categories, and that at any time, you take it up and you read a chapter, that you're slowly, this is not a marathon of getting to the end of the book, checking it off the list and, adding it to my, 1 million book list. But
Mhm.
it's more, are you always, it's looking at reading as a kind of a spiritual diet. And just like you would never say you should only eat beef all the time, you say, "Oh no, you need vegetables and you need carbs and you need protein," right? So it's
Mhm, mhm.
kind of a fun way of looking at it if you're thinking about how should I approach reading in my own life for my personal development, to kind of think of it as it's good for it to be a diet, a mix of
Yeah.
things. So
Well, that trio actually, I don't think I've ever heard that. You haven't shared that with me, and I haven't really read Charlotte Mason, but that trio fits with what we were saying. It was
Right.
kind of my two, plus you're adding in, well, of course, and then there is this one that's a little bit different
Yeah.
of just kind of a how-to. I really like that. I wanna right now encourage people who might be discouraged. You're not gonna find a reader that's slower than I am. At
Hmm.
least I don't think. This is always a great pain between Sophia and me. If we and one of the challenges, if we wanna read a book at the same time.
Meaning not out loud, but at the same time
Well,
and track together.
when I just read to
Yeah.
myself, right. I mean, you could read 3 or 4 books in the time I would read 1.
Hmm.
And, so look, so this summer, I'm reading Jane Austen's Emma.
Hmm.
That was my kind of book, other than spiritual reading, to read this summer. Well, this summer's over half past, and I'm about halfway through Emma,
Hmm.
right? Other people might read 3 or 4, books, 5 or 6 over the summer. I will get through Emma this summer, and there it is. But honestly, because of that, I choose especially well, or try to be very discerning. It's not just, well, I'll just try this one out. No, I actually
Hmm.
never, ever just, well, just try this one. I make sure that whatever it is, I either have already read before, like Emma, or it comes so highly recommended, or it's just such an obvious classic that I know it's going to be worthwhile, because I honestly don't feel like I have the time to
Hmm.
get halfway through a book and be, well, shoot, dot, dot, dot. So I'm just saying there, I carry it, not physically. I carry it with me intellectually, kind of the whole summer. It's a little bit hard for me that I can't read 2 or 3, but I've accepted that. And every single day, at least at some point in the day, I think, oh, maybe I'll sit down and read Emma right now. At least 50, if not 2/3 of the time that thought crosses my mind, I don't, because it ends up that,
Hmm.
I have to run off and do something else at that moment. Or it's like, ooh, maybe this is a good moment to do that. And then I remember something bigger, practical, someone's coming to visit or whatever. And this is fine. Not complaining there. Just saying
Hmm.
that's something I think a lot of people relate to. But it, part of the point here, you don't have to be reading a lot, but that Emma is on my, what did you say, nightstand or
Hmm.
whatever. I mean, the same book tends to sit on my nightstand for a very long time.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be a standing reprimand to me. That's a good
Hmm.
way of saying that too. That I haven't gotten through it. No,
Hmm.
it's just a reminder to me of something that I enjoy and I'm going to come back to. So,
Hmm.
but what about the together aspect?
Hmm.
If we're
Yeah. Yeah.
go.
So how can we be together? I just wanted to laugh about the Jane Austen, because at one point when the children were quite little, I just thought, oh, my autobiography someday will be reading Jane Austen one sentence at a time. Because every time I sat down to read, about one sentence later, I got interrupted. So courage to those who are in that stage too. I definitely read more than one sentence at a time now, and it's great. So, but it was worth doing it. It was worth doing it, even one sentence at a time. I will say I read quickly, and there are downsides of that, but I also am very choosy about what I read, even though I read quickly, because I'm very impressionable and I really only want certain kind of images in my mind. So at some point, I decided that I would only read really great literature. And that does narrow things for me a bit. Fortunately, I love rereading and rereading and rereading. This is not to say I'm anti other books, but I just finally realized that my imagination is so sensitive to what I put into it that what I read really affects how I go through my life. And so I have to find things that are conducive to my growing in the virtues that I need in my own life. I often have said, this is how I feel about movies. I have no need to import somebody else's drama into my life because I have enough of my own drama. So there's certain kinds of books that if they're not giving enough back to make me grow and become a better person and strengthen me in the life that I'm living, I choose to not read those books. So,
And other people might be in other places on that. And here we're having a conversation and sharing kind of
mhm,
where we are, what we've done. I'm going to share a couple things that just think about reading for relationship. Get a little bit anecdotal, historical here. On our honeymoon, could be a little provocative. Well, never mind. A central, wonderful memory. Central. I mean, frankly, defining
so fun.
of our honeymoon was that we were reading The Lord of the Rings out loud together.
Yeah, which is a kind of
I
a
mean,
funny choice for your honeymoon, but we weren't choosing it for our honeymoon. It was just something that John had never read. I had never finished the trilogy, and we both thought, wow,
but
this
you
would
knew
be
you loved
really,
it. So
yes. And
we
of
were
course,
definitely going for something. I love when there was something that you had from before we were married that you really loved, that now
that we were
that you were
sharing.
sharing
Yeah,
with me.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously, The Lord of the Rings is a little bit dark and heavy in places, but I
Oh,
know,
I mean, but right,
yes.
right, to each
So
his
this is
own.
going to
But
bring
so
us to the
I'm
question
just
about
right.
how does literature develop relationship? And go ahead. Would you like to finish
Well,
describing that?
I just thought we'd just
Yes,
toss out a
go
couple
ahead.
others. Another central good memory of our marriage, central, was reading, what is it by Charlotte?
Barchester Towers.
Barchester
Yeah.
Towers.
Yeah. Super fun.
An incredibly fun, interesting book. I mean, a little bit higher brow. I mean, it's not easy read, but
And
it's
it's very much
very
set in a cultural
entertaining,
setting.
and
It's
it's
so
very
good.
it's just they're so interesting.
And
But
part of the
but
reason that one was particularly fun is because it's also very funny. And so in addition to
Anthony
being,
Trollope, Barchester Towers, which is part of a series,
yeah,
but Barchester
Chester
Towers
Towers.
is the most famous one in there.
And so,
How did we find the time? We literally
oh,
read it out loud together very early on in our marriage, but
but
we
I'll
did
tell
have
you,
children. It was not before
yes,
children.
no, because that was when children went to bed.
Yeah.
And we had the evenings, and that has radically changed now that our children are older.
They just don't go to bed.
They don't
It's
go to
really
bed,
funny.
and
Okay.
they do want to talk to you. So,
All right, so there was that. Okay, right. So look, and this might be that moment where people are thinking, "My goodness, we haven't seen each other all day. We have a million things to talk about, and so that's what we need to do after the children go to bed." Maybe it is. That's fine. We're just sharing that early on in our marriage. That's right. Of course, that's how we did it. After the children, went to
yeah,
bed, we would. Is it half hour? I mean, you can have a lot of fun reading and get through a
yeah.
short
It
chapter
was
or
however
something.
long one of us didn't fall asleep.
And yeah, and then we would start, and then we'd have to go back and start. So that was one of the ones, along with the trilogy. There's not that many books, Pride and Prejudice, that we
Well,
fully read out loud together. Other ones
Sir
that's
Walter Scott, Old
that's
Mortality.
oh my
Yeah, that was
goodness,
great too.
my goodness. That's why I'm
Yeah.
so glad I married you. That was so fun.
Yeah.
That was unbelievable. We named our house from a house in that Old Mortality. It was just a Walter Scott about religious wars in England,
In Scotland.
Scotland.
Mhm.
Amazing characters. All right, so we got to quit this reminiscing
Okay.
stuff. Get down to brass tacks.
Yes. So the question is about relationship. So first of all, reading out loud together and what you're describing, it's relationship building because we're together having an experience that now you and I, we can reminisce about it. Oh, wasn't that great? Wasn't it fun? That is part of relationship building. But actually another thing, we've also read Jane Austen out loud together. And I would say Jane Austen more than any of the other ones is kind of fodder for conversation and discussion. So the other very important way, and in a certain sense, I think it's the most important way in which reading is relationship building and which allows spouses to either read something independently or read something independently, but at the same time, versus reading out loud together, is that you're encountering things in the book that become a topic of conversation or a springboard for conversation that leads to something deeper. And it's actually, when the author is really, really good, they're actually giving you substance and the stuff to make part of your conversation that's actually beyond your capacity, especially when we were young and getting married. Now maybe we can bring more to the books than we did when we were young. But especially when we were young, it was the richness of Jane Austen that became the stuff of our consideration. The richness of Anthony Trollope or J.R.R. Tolkien or C.S. Lewis when we're reading that.
Wendell Berry.
Yeah, exactly. Wendell Berry was another one. So my kind of example of that in my experience as a musician, especially I teach young children how to play the violin. When we get to the point where they're sight reading fluently, I have this wonderful sight reading book that's just Mozart duets. And, you're playing with children and sometimes it's not terribly musical, but there's something about Mozart that even if you play it badly, you start playing musically. And so it's like, it's Mozart's work that actually begins to bring us up to a different level. Reading great literature together is kind of the same thing. It gives you the stuff to talk about that maybe you in your own capacity wouldn't really, or frankly, the impoverishment of the world that we live in right now. What are the circumstances that we're encountering? Do they provide the opportunity for us to talk about these substantial things? Maybe everybody has enough drama in their own life, but actually maybe it's easier to talk about that particular drama in somebody else's life that you encounter in work of literature or
Right.
a historical novel or a beautiful biography. So I think that one of the main ways that reading provides an opportunity for a relationship, it actually gives you something to talk about.
And right, so when I say what movies give you something to talk about, it's sure.
And a really good movie
I'm not
does
gonna,
have that
I'm not going
effect.
to at all deny that can be the case. And we certainly have. Last podcast we talked about watching the movie The Secret of Rowan Innish
Yeah.
together. So
Yeah.
there's no doubt about that. But I'm not sure if I'm ready to put into words exactly the difference.
I have
I'm
an idea.
convinced good then because there's clearly a greater richness here. There's just more going on. There's more to share. There's more inner cultivation. I think.
I think it's actually the extended duration. of the experience of reading that does something very unique and different from watching a movie, because there are movies that are incredible. Babette's Feast, an incredible opportunity for a much deeper conversation, but it's 2 hours and then you talk about it. There's something about the experience of extended duration of reading a book. It takes time to get from point A to point B. It's like reading a Willa Cather novel. Oh, those are another experiences of reading out loud together.
Because we've done that, some of those with the children too. Shadows on the Rock.
Yeah, incredible. And this is an example of reading for relationship. I've read many of her novels that you haven't read yet, but I've told you about them extensively as I'm reading them. And even though you weren't reading it, it provided an opportunity for
Song of the
conversation.
Lark is too big. I'm never going to
Yeah.
read it. I
Oh, I'm
apologize.
so
It's just,
sorry.
it's
Oh, it
just,
breaks my
I
heart.
can't do it. Just like
Yeah.
I'm never going to go all the way through Tolstoy's.
Anna Karenina.
Yeah,
War and
well,
Peace.
then I might listen to that though, because I've listened to most of that.
Mhm.
Brothers K.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
again, I know that's a masterpiece, and hey, I'm not, and boom, we all have to know our own limitations. But you have read Song of the Lark. You love Song of the Lark. It's super long. Shadows on the Rock and Death Comes to the Archbishop are
Much
so
shorter.
much shorter.
Yeah.
I'm able to kind of read those, and we can discuss them together.
Yeah.
Again, everyone has to find their own way here.
So I think that's the first of all, reading is incredibly important because it forms us in a certain kind of way. As regards relationship, it gives us the opportunity to talk about substantial things that we then share together and grow together. The duration of reading a book, first of all, you really experience the duration if you're reading out loud together. Sometimes it's incredibly annoying how long it can take to read a novel when you're waiting for a time that everybody's available and we can all read out loud. So it can take really, really long, but there's something about the slowness of it that allows you to kind of chew on it and have the flavor in a different way. And it gives time for your experience of it to mature and ripen.
Right.
And so your conversation becomes a little bit different versus the 2 hour experience, sensory, emotional, intellectual experience of a movie.
And just to make one other quick comment there, again, I love a good movie,
Mm-hmm.
and I love discussing it with you. So
Mhm.
it has its wonderful place, but somehow I just think there's something about reading where you have to use your own imagination. You're left with a little bit
Yeah.
more freedom,
Mm-hmm.
and a little more is demanded of you. I'm not saying that a good movie doesn't demand something of you. It does, absolutely does. But there's something more, I think, demanded of you as you develop your imagination, your thoughts and reflections on this slowly unfolding story. The time aspect, that's worth thinking about more too. But again, the point here isn't to talk about the differences. We're just trying to give a little bit of an appreciation of reading together in the various senses. Reading out loud together is a uniquely powerful thing. We absolutely loved doing it after the children in bed. Let's just, again, these principles, friends,
Yeah.
unmarried, empty nest,
Getting together to read something out
people
loud.
getting together with a small group of friends.
Yeah.
Reading together aloud is so utilized.
Yeah.
Short story, Belloc essay. This is a huge part, and we have other podcasts on this or discussions of it of with our family. And we've talked about reading A Christmas Carol out loud together at Christmas with the whole family. It takes a little bit of time, but then that as a way of great works like that raise the deep. They're beautiful.
Yeah.
You marvel at them together, you wonder at them together, you smile and laugh and cry at them together. It should help us develop habits of drawing others out
Right.
and really listening.
Right.
When we're talking about reading together for relationship, this is
Yeah.
where especially, I want to say, a husband needs to learn if it's going to be a positive experience, that you've given some time for your wife to do some reading. Maybe this is where we have to make this, well, she wants to read such and such, maybe shock her to death. Well, what if I read that too at the same time and we
Mhm.
discussed it?
Yeah.
How she would love this.
Yeah.
But then make sure are we interested? Sorry, I'm going to go really big here. Are we really interested to know
Mhm.
what our wife thinks about the book that she's reading?
Mhm.
Would we find ourselves saying, whatever, well, go ahead and
Mhm.
just run off and enjoy it, honey. This might be a good opportunity for a deeper self-reflection. Where is our relationship?
Mhm.
Are we really appreciating? Are we really in love?
Mhm.
Are we really interested in the interior movements, the sense of the fears and
Mhm.
the concerns, the reflections. And if we're not as interested as even we'd like to be, that's something we can work on.
Mm.
And a fabulous context for working on it is just kind of right there on hand versus just, well, dear, tell me something you're thinking about
Mhm.
life, which is bad in itself.
Yeah.
But it's a little easier to, well, what are you reading? You don't have time to read. Well, we're going to make sure you have time. Or now you're tell me because I want to know how it moves you,
Yeah.
what you're
Yeah.
thinking about things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's kind of what's striking me right now in a very practical vein, thinking about our own situation right now. Wow. I haven't really asked you how Emma's going and what's striking you about it. So we do have to develop habits of remembering. In a certain sense, I don't think about it because I love Emma. I know you love Emma. I know we both love it. I'm happy you're reading it. Okay, great. But I could use that as an opportunity for communication and say, "Hey, what part are you in? How does that strike you? Do you still feel the same about Knightley as you did before? Like, even if you don't know this, tell me more. Tell me what your experience is." And I've kind of missed the opportunity to do that. Fortunately, you're reading so slowly. I still have the other half of the
You got
summer.
lots of time. I know
Yeah.
you haven't missed it. Maybe up to this point, we haven't.
Yeah.
And of course, I've missed. Though again, I'm always thinking about you when I'm reading it. I'm always thinking, what does Sophia think of this, or what would she respond to this?
Hmm.
And so, in a sense, as I'm reading it, you are always present, and even and that maybe is partially a gift of other aspects of our relationship, or it's a fruit of that we have developed habits of reading together
Hmm.
and discussing so that it becomes easier, or
Yeah.
even it expands and moves into what is she thinking about these things in general.
Yeah.
I think that's really striking me. This is at the center. This kind of indwelling in the thoughts of one another is
Hmm.
at the center of a marriage relationship, of any deep friendship.
Hmm.
And the whole kind of
Yeah.
broad realm of what we're calling reading together is a central instance of that, whether we're
Yeah.
actually reading out loud together or reading together, even from afar, thinking of what the other person is experiencing, looking forward to asking and sharing, even if we don't get the opportunity to actually do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It just strikes me how hard it is to practice that indwelling in a purely practical driven environment, and how reading can be kind of a place to grab onto the side of the ship as you're going down, so to speak. I mean, it's really, it's,
Or to jump in the lifeboat and
yeah.
back up.
Yeah, exactly. It's really striking me. It's so easy to get overly absorbed in the necessary, ordinary activities of daily life, which are so beautiful. And they do have a way of making us present to one another. And yet, how reading provides a kind of beautifully focused opportunity to practice that indwelling that really is kind of at the heart of living in a relationship and being able to grow it.
I think so, dear. And I want to wrap up. I just think we've kind of made a theme of the subtitle of my book, Living as If People Matter. And I'm
Hmm.
constantly saying to people, it's not just a slogan, and it means something. And
Hmm.
like, it just seems to me that these aspects of reading together, this is, in a sense, a very good embodiment of living as if people matter,
Hmm.
transcending the always kind of being in the practical, as it were,
Hmm.
and remembering we're made for relationship.
Hmm.
It's always about relationship. So just in closing, dear, I mean, practical. I hope by even being anecdotal, we've made some practical
Hmm.
suggestions of friends reach out to friends, spouses especially reach out to your spouse. Is it between an adult child and
Yeah,
you,
that's a
or
great
read something
place
together
too.
at we've
Yeah.
tried to do that. We started to do that. We reach something together as a family with our adult children.
Yeah.
It's life's about making some simple resolutions.
Yeah.
Choose some way, maybe beginning with make an examination of our own reading, make examination of the reading that those maybe we have responsibility over or responsibility to take care of, or can have the capability of freeing them up to do more reading. What can we be doing to make that possible?
Mhm.
Then what are the different layers of sharing together? Is it possibly sometimes reading out loud together? Is it in any case having a habit of asking? Talk about a great reason to go on a date night, right? Or just to sit down together in the evening or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, and I just wanted to for people, if they're not sure where to start reading, I just wanted to remind people that at Sophia's Corner at the website life-craft.org is I have some book lists for children, reading with children in different age groups, and also Jane Austen study questions. If people are interested in doing Jane Austen, I'm not by any stretch of the imagination a Jane Austen expert, but I'm a Jane Austen lover. And so those might be some kind of a great kind of stepping stone for a first kind of entree into Jane Austen.
I really
There's just so much good stuff out
by and
there.
large, to make some effort reading her is almost always to
Yeah.
fall in love
Yes.
with her,
She's amazing.
with what she's going after there. And
Mhm.
Pride and Prejudice, of course, is always a great place to start. I don't think it's just because I'm reading it. Maybe it is. I really do think it's my favorite.
Whoa. Okay.
But you need to ask me,
I know. Wow,
dear.
I would never have known
Why? I mean,
that.
why?
Darn, it's a good thing we do a
Dear, thanks for this
podcast.
conversation, and thanks all for joining us. Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.